On the white jade plaza of Qingyun, Sect, the air felt frozen, like a lake sealed in ice. Lucas, an American who had crossed into this mystical world, stood before the massive spirit testing stone. Hope had been shining in his clear blue eyes, and now it was breaking apart. Moments earlier, he had pressed his palm to the black monolith that decided fate. He had wanted the heavens to answer with a miracle like the heroes in stories, but the stone gave him only dead silence. The white-robed elder in charge glanced at him. Without warmth, his voice boomed over the plaza like thunder. He declared void spirit. Root, he declared heaven. Abandoned body, he said. Lucas would never draw in even a thread of pure spiritual chi, for as long as he lived, those words smashed the last pride Lucas carried as a transmigrator. In the same breath, they drove him into the dust. Around him, thousands of inner Sect disciples in white burst into open laughter. Mocking eyes stabbed at the blonde, blue-eyed stranger. In their minds, the soul from across the ocean was nothing but a defective scrap. That even the spiritual chi rejected. The elder flicked his sleeve with impatience, as if swatting a fly. He passed judgment without hesitation. If Lucas could not cultivate, then Lucas would shovel filth as a menial in the spirit beast yard on the back mountain. He told him not to waste the Sect grain falling from the clouds into the mud. Took only a heartbeat. Night came down. The spirit beast yard sat in the most remote corner of Qingyun Sect. The air reeked of rancid musk and rot that turned the stomach. Lucas gripped a chipped iron shovel. Filth covered him as he sat on a hay pile that stank of mold. He had lived with dignity in modern civilization. Now, in this other world, he kept company with beast, dung, the whiplash of who he had been made. His head swim, and the hunger churning in his gut burned like fire. He had just received his only ration for the day. It was a black flour bun, hard as stone. He lifted it toward his mouth. A broad shadow blocked the moonlight at the doorway. Zhao, the outer Sect bully, stepped into the ruined menial shack with a face of heavy flesh. He snatched the bun from Lucas' hand. Zhao bared a savage grin, and his eyes held only mockery and cruelty. He said, a piece of trash like you eats only to waste food. He said, it is better to feed it to my spirit hound to sharpen its teeth. Lucas tried to argue. Zhao Hu shoved him hard. Lucas crashed against the rough stone wall. Zhao Hu toyed with the stolen food. He spat a thick wad of phlegm by Lucas' feet. He snarled. For Lucas to remember this place, he said. You are lower than those beasts, he said. You sleep in this hay tonight, he said. Do not dirty the floor. He said, that floor is for people. He said, it is not for garbage. Like you. Zhao Hu laughed and strode away. Only dead silence remained in the room. Lucas held his chest, where it throbbed and curled into the cold hay. Through gaps in the broken roof, he stared at a strange, uncaring sky of stars. The hunger in his belly chewed at his stomach. Without mercy, humiliation flowed through his veins. Like magma, at last, he understood this place had no law and no equality. It had only the raw rule of the strong devouring the weak. In the endless dark, Lucas clenched his fists. His nails cut deep into his palms. He forced himself to swallow the bitter mouthful called reality, and his eyes hardened in despair. Like cold iron, Zhao Hu drove a hard kick into Lucas' lower belly. Several empty jade bottles rolled across the ground and shattered. The sharp cracking sound ripped through the quiet spirit beast yard. Lucas was still reeling in pain when Zhao Hu started shouting to the steward, who came running over. Zhao Hu pointed at Lucas and cried that this foreign trash had stolen and eaten precious spirit beast pills. The steward swept a cold glance over the broken bottle shards on the ground. He could not be bothered to hear a defense from a waste. With no spirit root, he snapped his whip, and it howled through the air. The strike slammed into Lucas. Back the lashes kept coming until skin split and flesh tore open. Lucas clenched his teeth into his lip and made himself stay silent. He did not let out a single pleading scream. Only when they tossed him back into the beast pen that reeked of filth did it end. They announced that Lucas would be denied food. For 3 days, hunger and pain clung to him like a curse that would not let go. But the fire in Lucas' eyes cooled fast. It turned into a calm that felt almost mechanical in the iron cage. Beside him, the two-headed fire lion, that was usually the most savage, was ramming the bars again and again. Its howls shook dust down from above. The other menials said it was just a spirit beast that could not be tamed. Lucas did not see wild nature in it. He saw bloodshot eyes and jerking spasms. With no pattern, he saw a nervous reaction that looked like sickness. He endured the agony in his back and dragged his heavy body to the feed trough. He forced himself to look at everything again with the logic of modern biology. In that heap of unknown spirit herb feed, he found several plain purple companion grass. They were soul thorn grass to cultivators. It was a worthless weed, but its sap carried a fierce neurotoxin. This was not savagery. This was poisoning. Lucas drew a slow breath, using the cover of night. He took a risk and climbed into the beast pen. The two-headed fire lion caught the scent of a stranger. It lunged with its jaws wide and foul wind blasting into Lucas' face. Lucas twisted and rolled across the ground. He barely slipped past the claws. He moved fast and tore every stalk of soulthorn grass out of the trough. He flung the weed toward a sewage ditch farther off once the poison source was gone. The madness began to fade. After half an hour, the restless spirit beasts grew quiet, as if a spell had broken. Only rough breathing remained. Lucas leaned into a corner and gulped air. A gaunt figure appeared outside the beast pen without a sound. Elder Zhang, who oversaw the spirit beast yard, stood there in a gray robe. Those old eyes were cloudy, yet deep. They looked through the bars and locked onto the blond young man with no spirit power. Elder Zhang did not care about the wrecked feet on the ground. He stared only at Lucas. For the first time, a hint of something hard to read surfaced on that face. Like dried tangerine peel, the outcast everyone called trash had seen details that the self-styled heaven-chosen prodigies had never once noticed. Take it if you cannot master it. You die. If you do master it, you become half a ghost. Elder Zhang voice sounded like dry wood scraping together. A black tattered scroll that smelled of mold flew down and hit the mud beside Lucas' feet. The pages of Hunyuan Return to One art were yellowed with age. Even the cover was stained with dark red dried blood. Elder Zhang did not explain anything. He turned and disappeared into the night. He left only one icy warning behind it. Felt like he had tossed down not a secret manual, but a death warrant. Lucas picked up the tattered scroll. The moment his fingertips touched the cover, a bone-deep chill climbed up through his hand. Before Lucas could open the first page, the wooden door of the spirit beast yard was kicked open. Zhao Hu swaggered in with several lackeys behind him. When he saw the tattered scroll in Lucas' hands, he burst into a shrill, ugly laugh. Zhao Hou stomped one foot onto the hay bed. Lucas had just spread. He spat down from above. With eyes full of mockery and cruelty, he announced that since Lucas Trash was not dead yet, he would let him live a few more days. He promised that in 3 months, at the Outer Sect minor tournament, he would personally sign a life and death pact. On the arena platform, he promised he would crush every bone in Lucas' body. One by one, after leaving that notice of death, Zhao Hu and his men strode away, as casually as if pinching an ant to death. In a corner of the beast pen, where the stench of waste and rot clung to everything, Lucas opened that forbidden book by the weak moonlight. What it taught was shocking beyond belief. It demanded he draw the filthiest tainted chi of heaven and earth into his body. In the cultivation world, tainted chi corroded meridians and polluted spirit roots. Cultivators treated it as a deadly poison and avoided it at all costs. But for Lucas, it was his only road to live. He sat down cross-legged. He stopped resisting the nauseating stink around him. Instead, he followed the twisted route in the book and tried to guide that power into his body. In an instant, a scorching flood like sulfuric acid punched through his pores. The agony drenched Lucas in cold sweat. Every muscle in his body seized and jerked. It felt like countless rusty blunt knives were scraping wildly through his blood vessels. Any normal spirit root would have shattered the moment it touched that tainted chi, but the void spirit root inside Lucas, that had been judged dead and silent, became a greedy black hole. It was not destroyed by the tainted chi. It devoured that violent, destructive energy with fenghuang hunger. His once fragile meridians snapped apart inch by inch under the scouring rush. Then they rebuilt in the same heartbeat, thicker and tougher than before. Lucas clenched his teeth until his mouth filled with the taste of blood. He realized this was not cultivating at all. This was using radiation like energy to force a brutal rewrite of his genes. When the first wisp of ash-gray energy gathered inside his Dantian, Lucas snapped his eyes open, deep in his pupils. A chilling dim light swept past. It was the gaze of a predator. The deep night spirit beast yard reeked so hard it could choke a man, yet to Lucas it felt like a feast fit for a glutton. He sat cross-legged beside the dung pile. He let the gray-black miasma around him move. Like soldiers who had received an order, it streamed without end into his body. What the cultivation world chased was pure spiritual chi, but Hunyuan, returned to one art, was tyrannical. And strange, the filthy tainted chi that would corrode ordinary meridians met the void spirit root inside him. Like a black hole under that transformation, it condensed bit by bit into a dark force, packed with destruction. The whole process hurt like blades, twisting through him. Lucas did not make a sound, because in this hopeless world, it was the only bargaining chip he had in the daylight work. Lucas did not waste a moment. He watched like a precise radar and gathered every piece of data he could about Zhao Hu. As an outer sect bully, Zhao Hu had chi refining, third layer cultivation, but under Lucas' modern tactical thinking, it was nothing but a tower built from too many pills. Zhao Hu's steps were unsteady. When he struck, his spirit power was mixed and impure. It was clear a great amount of pill toxin had piled up inside him without being expelled. This was the core of a symmetrical warfare strike, where he must defend and lure him into collapse. Lucas knew he could not win by trading spirit power head, and he was no match for Zhao Hu in total strength. But he discovered a deadly biochemical reaction. The tainted tea he had cultivated was fiercely corrosive. Once it touched pill toxin inside a cultivator that had not been fully refined, it triggered a violent rejection, and it would throw spirit power into instant chaos. The more Zhao Hu relied on pills to raise his cultivation, the more fatal this weakness became. To verify the theory, Lucas fixed his gaze on an ironback rat. It was agitated because it had stolen and eaten discarded pill residue. During feeding, Lucas extended one finger. A thread-thin gray line slipped in without a sound and entered the rat body. The ironback rat that had been ramming its cage went rigid in an instant. It was as if two forces inside it crashed against each other. In a brutal clash, after only 2 breaths, the rat frothed at the mouth. It went limp on the ground and completely lost the ability to move. Lucas pulled his finger back. The cold light in his eyes was colder than the moon in this world that worshipped strength. No one understood chemical reactions. No one understood weakness. Analysis. Zhao Hu thought Lucas was a lamb waiting for slaughter. He did not know the hunter had already set the trap 3 months later at the Outer Sect minor tournament. It would no longer be a duel. It would be a precise surgical strike. The blazing sun hung straight overhead. The stone slabs of the martial arena were baked so hot they seemed to burn through the soles. The air was thick with sweat and restless heat. Thousands of Outer Sect disciples packed around the arena platform. Their mocking stares flew like poison thorns into the center, where a thin foreigner stood alone. Lucas stood still in the middle of the roar. His face was dead calm, like a deep pool with no wind. There was no fear in his blue eyes, only a cold calculating look, like he was staring at a corpse. Zhao Hu leaped onto the arena platform. Laughing wildly, he rode an iron-armored rhino that weighed well over 1,000 pounds. The beast's eyes were red as blood-hot white breath blasted from its nostrils. It was clearly in a fevered frenzy far beyond normal. The moment the referee elder gave the order, Zhao Hu did not even bother to test the waters. He drove the iron-armored rhino straight into a charge. The ground trembled under the heavy pounding run. Zhao Hu whip snapped with a shriek like tearing cloth. It was as if he could already see Lucas crushed into paste beneath the hooves. The stands broke into startled cries. Everyone believed the man with a crippled spirit root was about to die for sure. But at the instant, the rhino horn, like a siege hammer, was about to hit Lucas' chest. Lucas moved. It was not the drifting grace of cultivators. It was an extreme stripped-down tactical sidestep. His body slipped past the killing line by a hair's breadth. Then his right hand, soaked for years in filth, flashed out like lightning. It pressed into the soft belly of the iron-armored rhino, right on the sea of chi acupoint. Ti Shang. There was no spirit power radiance at all, only a dim cold thread of gray breath that drilled into the beast. In an instant, this tainted chi born from Hun Yuan returned to one art was like a spark tossed into a pot of oil. It instantly set off the peel toxin that had built up inside the rhino from long-term overuse of forbidden drugs. The beast that had been charging with unstoppable force let out a scream so shrill it tore the air. Its huge body lost control and flipped hard under its own momentum. A deafening crash hit like thunder. Thus they exploded into the sky. Zhao Hu did not even have time to react. Before the crazed rhino flung him violently away, he slammed down onto the stone slabs. Before he could crawl up, the iron-armored rhino had already swung back around. It stomped its own master in a frenzy, as if trying to vent every shred of pain inside its body. Zhao Hu screamed again and again. Blood burst from his mouth in heavy sprays. Mixed in that blood were large amounts of blue drug dregs that had not been fully digested. The entire place fell into death-like silence. Only Lucas' cold voice cut through the dust. He said, "The spirit beast has gone mad, and the pill toxin has struck back," he said. "Zhao Hu, you stole the sect violent spirit-pilled to seize victory. And the evidence is certain. On the high platform, several elders shot to their feet, their eyes locked on the foreigner, standing with hands behind his back. On the arena platform, the strange gray light that had flashed for that single instant made a nameless chill rise in their hearts. The dust of the martial arena had not even settled when an ocean-vast pressure dropped from the sky. It covered the entire plaza in a single breath. The crowd that had been roaring sounded like its throat had been grabbed by an invisible hand. All voices cut off at once. A blazing white arc ripped across the heavens. A young man in a snow-white Dao robe arrived on a flying sword. He stopped 3 feet above the ground. His feet did not touch dust. He was Lin Xuan, the first heaven, chosen prodigy of the inner sect of Qingyun sect. Lin Xuan's eyes looked like they held stars. They swept over Zhao Hu lying on the ground. Then they fixed on Lucas. He did not look at a person. He looked like he was judging a flaw smeared with mud. He did not ask what happened. He only lifted one hand. A vast pure spiritual chi pressure crashed down on Lucas like a mountain. Lucas felt a 1,000-pound burden slam onto his shoulders. Every bone in his body groaned with sharp cracking sounds. The greenstone slab beneath his feet split inch by inch. His knees bent against his will. He bit down hard. His eyes went bloodshot. He forced his spine straight by sheer brutality. Lin Xuan's voice was clear and cold, like winter water. He asked what kind of evil art Lucas was cultivating. To him, the gray breath that had stirred the pure toxin in the iron-armored rhino was the greatest insult to heaven. And Earth orthodox cultivation sought purity and the rising of clear breath. Yet this foreigner toyed with filth and chaos. In Lin Xuan's eyes, it was rebellion. Blood seeped from the corner of Lucas' mouth. He still pulled up a mocking curve. He raised his head with effort. He stared straight at the lofty heaven, chosen prodigy, in broken common tongue. He rasped that if you win, it is evil art, and if you lose, it is righteous path. He said, your reasoning is truly interesting. Lin Xuan's brow tightened. He seemed offended by the defiance of an ant. He snorted. Once the pressure surged even harder, he clearly meant to break Lucas' legs as punishment. Lucas' body shook. His knees hovered a finger width from touching the ground. He was almost out of strength. Then an old yet thunderous voice cut through the crushing force. Sect Master Qing Yunzi appeared on the high platform with one sweep of his sleeve. He dissolved Lin Xuan's pressure. Lin Xuan drew his aura back. He bowed slightly toward the Sect Master. He still pointed at Lucas. He said, Sect Master, this one has void spirit root, yet draws tainted QI into his body. He said, he disrupts our sect fate. He asked to expel Lucas from the sect and abolish his cultivation. The entire plaza fell silent. Everyone looked at the foreigner, who stood in miserable ruin. Qing Yunzi's gaze was deep. It moved between the two men for a moment. Then he spoke slowly. Qing Yunzi said, if the path is in doubt, then let strength prove the doubt. Qing Yunzi said. 1 year from now, at the Sect Grand Tournament, Qing Yunzi said, if Lucas can receive 3 moves from Lin Xuan without defeat, then his method will be accepted. Qing Yunzi said, if Lucas loses, then he must abolish his own cultivation and be expelled from Qingyun sect. Lin Xuan gave a contemptuous smile. It was as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. He turned and left on his flying sword. His cold words echoed across the plaza. He said, 1 year, he said. You are not worthy, he said. I will show you that some chasms cannot be filled, even if you gamble your life. Lucas wiped the blood from his mouth. He watched the white figure vanish into the distance. The deep blue light in his eyes turned colder than ever. In this world, justice was defined by the strong, and he would break that definition no matter what it cost. A razor-cold astral wind raged at the cliff edge of the back mountain forbidden grounds of Qingyun. Sected cut through the air like countless invisible blades. Lucas stood before a broken stone, stela carved with the warning, do not enter life and death. He did not hesitate for even a breath. He pushed off the edge and jumped straight into the tainted chi abyss, where even elders rarely dared to step. The wind in his ears turned into shrieking wails, like ghosts crying, as he felt the killing aura thick, as ink drilled into every pore of his skin. It felt like it wanted to rot his organs to mush. This was not just a fall. It was a gamble to claw life out of death. A dull, heavy impact slammed through him. Lucas crashed into the mud at the bottom of the abyss, so hard that he almost blacked out. There was no trace of immortal air here, only a stench of decay that made the throat turn, and violent, chaotic whirlpools of energy. All around him lay the pale bones of unknown giant beast. The skin on his body began to ulcerate. Fast it was the high concentration of tainted chi eating away at life itself. An ordinary cultivator would have panicked and guarded the heart meridian. Lucas did not. He forced himself upright, his deep blue eyes locked on the rolling black fog. There was no fear in that stare, only a cold calm. so intense it bordered on madness. To cultivators, this was lethal toxic killing aura. It was the filthiest thing under heaven, but inside the mind of Lucas, trained by modern higher education, it was only streams of particles at extremely high energy with chaotic trajectories. It was what he would call an entropy increase, state. He endured the bone-eating pain and began to run Hunyuan return to one art. Yet, he did not follow the crude guidance of the manual to swallow blindly. He started building a microscopic model inside his mind. He sank his awareness. Deeper, he took the waves of killing aura rushing at him and broke them apart in his cognition. What ordinary people called demonic foul split, in his view, into basic energy structures. He stopped letting his body passively adapt. To poison, he used a void spirit root with its black hole vacuum nature to forcibly sever the chemical bonds of those violent particles. His thoughts became a surgical blade. He sliced the chaotic energy masses. He compressed them. He rebuilt them. The killing aura that had been eating his flesh lost its unstable impurity structures. As he stripped them away, it transformed into a high-density energy he had never felt before. It surged like a flood into his dried-out meridians. In this lightless abyss, Lucas was no longer a rejected cultivator. He was a man dismantling the world and taking control of what remained at the bottom of the tainted chi abyss. There was no sun and no moon. There was only endless slaughter and endless devouring. A bloodthirsty demon, ape covered in bone spikes, roared and lunged at Lucas. Its claws could rip steel as easily as cloth. In the past, Lucas could only close his eyes and wait for death. Now there was not even a ripple in his deep blue eyes. It was as if he were watching a pile of cells about to break apart under a microscope. He did not dodge. He did not retreat. He raised his right arm, wrapped in black flowing radiance. He drove a single plain punch forward. There was no earth-shaking spirit power blast. There was only a strange muffled impact. The moment the fist met the demon ape, the huge body went rigid. Then its flesh and blood seemed to lose the force that held it together under the tyrannical dismantling of the void spirit root. It collapsed in an instant. It turned into a pure particle stream that surged back into Lucas' body. This was the Hunyuan body. He used his own body as a furnace. He treated all energy in all things as fuel after a year of hellish. Tempering his flesh was no longer mortal. Every inch of muscle fiber was like high-strength alloy, forged by precise calculation. What flowed in him was no longer ordinary spiritual chi, it was Hunyuan power. It fused clear and turbid energies and held them in dynamic balance in his vision. The world was no longer mountains and rivers and trees and grass. It was a matrix built from countless energy equations, and he held the key that could rewrite those formulas. When the year ended, Lucas climbed up the steep cliff face. When he stood again on the edge, the long mist sunlight made him narrow his eyes. His clothes were in rags. Like a wild man, his long hair hung in a tangled curtain over his shoulders. Yet the sharp aura he once carried had fully withdrawn. He felt deep like a dry well with no visible bottom. Even standing there, he seemed out of place with the surrounding space. Several intersect disciples in brocade robe happened to patrol past when they saw Lucas. They burst into harsh laughter. They said this was the waste who jumped the cliff to die. They said he still had not died cleanly. One of them tried to show off in front of the others. He summoned a flying sword that became a streak of cold light and stabbed at Lucas' forehead. Even as he struck, he kept mocking the 100 ways a menial could die. In Lucas' eyes, that fierce sword strike was full of flaws. The spirit power structure clinging to the blade was so loose, it was ridiculous. The energy conversion efficiency was so low, it was absurd. He could not even be bothered to draw the rough beast bone long blade on his back. He simply lifted his hand. He reached through the air and closed his fingers, as if gripping the sword. That simple motion was like crushing an invisible rule. The flying sword shook violently in midair. Inside the blade, the spirit power that had been neatly arranged turned chaotic. In an instant, a chain collapse raced through its structure. The flying sword exploded into fragments. The disciple who struck was hit like lightning. He sprayed blood in a wild burst. He stared in terror as his spirit power went out of control and surged backward inside him. Agony tore through his meridians. He went limp and collapsed to the ground. The remaining disciples staggered back in fear, their eyes filled with terror at the unknown. They called it demon art with trembling voices. Lucas did not spare them a glance. He stepped past the disciple who was wailing on the ground. He walked with steady steps straight towards Sect Master Peak. At Xingyun Sect martial arena, the atmosphere was so heavy, it felt like even the air could freeze. On one side stood Lin Xuan, the first of the inner sect, in white robes with sword intent. Cutting outward, he was like a blazing sun representing the most orthodox and pure power in the cultivation world. On the other side stood Lucas in torn clothes, with a calm, indifferent face. Gray currents slowly coiled around him like a chaotic demon god from the abyss. This was not only a duel between two men, it was a clash between two completely different cultivation ideals. Lin Xuan moved first. He flicked his long sword. In that instant, the sword howl rose like dragon and tiger. Cries golden light filled the sky and became countless sword Q that swept down to shred Lucas from every direction. This was Qingyun's sect guarding supreme. Art Great Law Celestial Gang Sword Art. Every strand of sword she carried terrifying spirit power, enough to pierce metal and stone. The disciples, watching, cried out in shock. In their eyes, this attack had no blind spots and could turn any cultivator of the same realm into dust. Yet Lucas' eyes did not change at all. On his retina, the brilliant golden sword key was not an unstoppable miracle. It was a series of high-energy particle beams, moving at extreme speed if it was energy in motion. Then it had to obey physical laws. His figure suddenly became elusive and hard to grasp. He did not use any normal movement art. He slipped through the dense gaps in the sword key with a posture that defied human mechanics. Every dodge was precise to the smallest fraction sharp. Sword key grazed past the edge of his robe, yet still could not touch his true body. Lucas was like a ghost walking through a storm. His calm was chilling beyond belief. He did not rush to counterattack. Those deep blue pupils spun fast as he parsed the bottom layer logic of spirit power construction within Lin Xuan. Seemingly flawless sword moves in ordinary eyes. The sword net had no weakness in his eyes. Tiny energy nodes gradually revealed themselves. They were structural weak points formed in the instant spirit power conversion occurred. Lin Xuan grew more alarmed the longer he fought. His spirit power pressure clearly crushed the other side, yet every attack felt like it struck empty air. That pent-up frustration of having strength with nowhere to land made him more and more violent, and because of it, his sword momentum gained a trace of extremely subtle disorder. That brief flaw was caught precisely by Lucas. Now the figure that had been weaving and dodging suddenly stopped. Gray Hanyuan power compressed wildly at his fingertips. He prepared to give this so-called orthodox, heaven-chosen prodigy a fatal strike. Lin Xuan was enraged to the core. As the inner sect number 1 of Qingyun sect, he had never been treated with such contempt. He stopped holding back. Spirit power inside him surged like a ruptured riverbank and poured into his sword. The golden sword radiance turned in an instant into a blinding pale white glare. This was his trump card. 10,000 swords returned to the source. It was not splitting sword key. It was compressing every shred of killing intent into a single point. He swore to erase the eerie menial in front of him. Completely the air groaned under the crushing spiritual pressure. The defensive array around the arena platform trembled violently, facing an attack that could drive ordinary foundation establishment realm cultivators into despair. Lucas let the corner of his mouth lift in his sight. It was no longer a sword. It was an extremely unstable high energy aggregate. He stopped dodging. Instead, he stepped forward into the sword edge. That step landed on the boundary between life and death. His right palm formed a loose fist. The tainted chi that the cultivation world called deadly poison was forced into extreme compression. In his palm, a deep gray singularity took shape. When matter meets antimatter, it produces annihilation. In this world, the purest spiritual chi and the most turbid killing aura collided under crushing pressure. The effect was even more extreme in the last instant. Before the sword tip touched his brow, Lucas pressed the unstable gray singularity with perfect precision onto the strongest energy node in Lin Xuan's sword momentum. There was no earth-shaking explosion. It was as if heaven and earth went deaf. In that single heartbeat, a fist-sized black light sphere appeared out of nothing. It looked like a greedy abyss mouth. It swallowed Lin Xuan's arrogant sword radiance. In an instant, even the surrounding light twisted and was drowning. G'd into it. Right after that, a visible black ripple burst outward from the impact point. It spread in a savage ring. Then the delayed roar finally arrived. It detonated. Like thunder exploding beside the ear, the upper-grade spirit sword in Lin Xuan's hand shattered inch by inch. It turned into drifting powder across the sky. Lin Xuan was thrown back like a kite with its string cut. Blood streaked through the air in a brutal red line. He crashed at the edge of the arena platform. His chest caved in. Life and death were unknown When the dust cleared, Lucas stood alone at the center of the arena platform, which had cracked into a net-like web. His clothes were torn, but his back was ramrod. Straight the gray currents, coiling around him, looked even more grim, and chilling the entire crowd, fell into dead silence. Everyone stared at the former waste in terror. He had used the most extreme method to break the iron rule that pure meant strongest for tens of thousands of years. The referee elder trembled as he tried to announce the result, and in that instant, a sudden change erupted. That annihilation of energy seemed to have touched something older and deeper. A clear sky tore with a sharp sound like cloth being ripped. The crowd jerked their heads up in shock. High above, a pitch-black crack began to open slowly. It looked like a demonic eye peering down at the mortal world. Icy astral wind poured out of it and spilled across the arena below. After that sharp crack, the sound that followed was not thunder. It was a collapsing roar that made teeth ache. The crack in the sky was not still. It spread like a wound, tearing wider. In a frenzy, a heartbreaking wail rode the wind. Countless gray-brown streams poured down from above. This was not the familiar spiritual chi of the cultivation world. This was a chaotic, tainted torrent filled with primal brutality and destruction. The sect protecting grand formation that Qingyun sect took pride in did not last even half a breath before it. The defensive shield that had glimmered with gold year after year turned into thin paper, dropped in strong acid. It was corroded to nothing in an instant. An elder of Punishment Hall took the first hit and shouted in fury. He raised his life-bound treasure to block it, but the flying sword he had nurtured for 100 years touched the gray stream. Once the spiritual light on the blade went dim at once. In the next moment, it became lifeless scrap iron and fell into the dust. The elder face went paper white. He spat a mouthful of black blood. He howled in terror for everyone to stop circulating power. He said, "This thing can devour spirit power." Panic detonated across the plaza like a plague, set loose. The inner sect disciples, who usually stood high above others, now looked wretched and desperate. The cultivation they took pride in became a death warrant. The purer the spirit power in their bodies, the fiercer the backlash from chaotic, tainted chi. Even the barrier formed by the sect master and several supreme elders was driven back step by step. In the blink of an eye, the whole Qingyun sect fell from an immortal paradise into a slaughtering hell. Everyone fled backward in madness. They wished for 2 more legs, just to get farther from the source of death. Only one person moved against the tide. Lucas stood in the shattered ruins of the arena platform. He let the gray stream scour his body without resistance to every other cultivator. It was poison that ate into bone. To him, it was a feast he had never tasted before. That so-called void spirit root was now like a black hole that had thirsted for 10,000 years. It devoured these high-density chaotic energies with greedy hunger. The meridians inside Lucas seemed to cheer. Every cell in his body was reborn in this destructive storm. He watched the cultivators who once acted untouchable, now scrambling like stray dogs. A cold, mocking glint flashed through Lucas' eyes. In this end of days, where spiritual chi failed and order collapsed, the outcast they called trash became the only king. He ignored the screams and stunned cries. Behind him, he stepped forward. He walked with a calm face, straight toward the sky rift, abyss that was still spewing destruction. Lucas stepped onto empty air. Each step was like landing on a node in the pulse of heaven and earth. The chaotic, tainted torrent that could corrode even great ascension. Realm flesh now surged into his body, like swallows returning to their nests. The body that countless people had mocked as mortal flesh now ignited with gray-white flame. It was not a flame of destruction. It was the furnace light that reforged order. Since this heaven and earth could not hold chaos, he used his own body as the boundary. He used his flesh and blood as a filter. He forced the world to turn back. As Lucas kept drawing closer to the core of the sky rift, Hunyuan returned to one art inside him, ran to the limit. His meridians snapped inch by inch and then reknit in the same breath. He spread his arms. He let out a roar that shook the whole sky. He drew in every stream of violent energy pouring down from above. Under the gaze of people so terrified they could not breathe, a miracle happened. What drifted out behind Lucas was no longer deadly tainted chi. It was spirit rain, so rich it could not be thinned in that moment. He was like a massive converter. He carried the filth of the world alone, yet he fed life back to all beings. Flesh could only carry so much. When the last violent origin law slammed into his chest, Lucas understood his ending had arrived. That so-called void spirit root had been born to hold this moment. When heaven and earth broke, he hesitated. Not at all. His whole body became a blazing streak of light. He rushed without turning back into the savage heavens. Wound there was no earth-shaking explosion. Only a gentle hum swept across the land Luca's body, completely disintegrated inside the overloaded radiance. Yet his awareness did not vanish it, fused perfectly with the world laws of this realm. The sky rift slowly closed. As that streak of light filled it, the raging storm stopped in an instant. In its place came a sweet rain that blessed all living things. In that rain, dead trees returned to spring among broken walls and shattered ruins. Bright flowers opened. Everyone could feel the spiritual chi between heaven and earth had become more accepting it, no longer rejected the different. That proud solitary figure no longer existed under heaven. Only the long wind cried across the world. The surviving cultivators bathed in the spirit rain. Their faces shifted from blank shock to solemn stillness. At the front of the crowd, Lin Xuan, the heaven-chosen prodigy, who always looked down on others, stared at the sky restored to deep blue. His knees trembled at last. He dropped to the ground in a heavy kneel, his forehead pressed to the earth. He did not dare lift his head for a long time. There was no greater irony than this. The trash cursed by every rule became the god who repaired the rules. From this day on, Qingyun Sect had no menial named Lucas. It had only the Hunyuan Dao ancestor who entered union with the Dao to save all beings. He lived forever at the peak of legend, looking down on the land where he once struggled to survive, and that he now guarded with quiet gentleness.